Song Zhang, Robert there talked about retaliation from China. There are indications that China may retaliate by imposing tariffs on US imports, particularly agricultural imports from the United States. That also, according to one report I've seen here, would affect, in a political sense, it would affect Trump's constituency, wouldn't it? These are farmers who are going to be affected. How will China do that? Is it going to be a carefully calibrated response, or are we going to see China just impose these tariffs like the Americans have done?
I think as soon as this coming morning in Beijing, we might see some retaliations coming from China. And as you said, there are a couple of areas which China may target. And I think Mr. Trump, his supporters, those states who are Mr. Trump's support, a lot of Trump's supporters are there, will be the most vulnerable for this kind of retaliation, especially this soybean and other agriculture products will be vulnerable for the retaliation, and also aeroplanes are going to be targeted, in my opinion. There are a couple of other products, so I think there will be no winner in this kind of trade war, and from both sides there will be a lot of lose.
Right, we've heard that before from the Chinese President, Xi Jinping. Chen Zhao, let's listen to how the Chinese Foreign Ministry is responding to this latest announcement from the White House. Let's watch.
We resolutely oppose this type of unilateral and protectionist action by the U.S. China will not sit idly by while legitimate rights and interests are hurt. We must take all necessary measures to firmly defend our rights and interests. We hope the U.S. can see clearly that the nature of China and U.S. trade relations is to mutual benefit and win-win.
So, Chen Zhao, there we heard it. China will not sit by idly while its legitimate interests are hurt. How will China respond?
I don't know. I think personally, I think they have to retaliate. I mean, politically speaking, they can't seem to be very soft. They basically have already ramped up all this nationalist sentiment, so they have to retaliate. I think probably they're going to select an area where, as your previous speaker said, probably going to target the Trump supporters, Iowa, you know, the farmers, the Midwest, the middle part of America. That's probably one area they want to go after. Another thing is that people always forget that the U.S. actually run a pretty big service surplus, invisible account surplus with China. Trade is in big deficit, but America sells a lot of services to China. So probably they're going to look into that area too. But the bottom line here is, I think the Chinese response should be measured and proportionate. So you don't want to get into a downward spiral here. Because if you go into a downward spiral, it's going to hurt badly on both sides. So there'll be no winner. Right now, 50, 60 billion, not a big deal. But tit for tat, downward spiral warfare, that is a disaster. So I don't think the Chinese government should do that. But they should make it clear that, yes, we have to respond. We have to respond in proportionate to what you have already provoked. And stop right there. I hope that the cool head will prevail, but I don't know. The problem here is more with the Trump administration, because I do not understand, you know, it's not very clear to us at all, the objective. What is the objective? Are you trying to bring all this manufacturing of toys and the shoes and textile back to the United States by imposing this tariff? If that is objective, fine, you know, do it. That is a counterproductive from a historical point of view, from economic evolutionary point of view. That is make no sense. So we don't understand at this point the objective. It seems to me it's a purely politically motivated. Basically, he's trying to please his base. If that is the case, this thing can get very, very messy very quickly. Yeah. Because we don't know what they're trying to achieve.
Okay, Dan, this is
Can I just say one thing? I agree very much that this should not get blown up. That if this really becomes tit for a tat and escalates, and it could be a very bad trade war, I think the reactions of both sides should be measured and controlled so it doesn't get out of hand. It's very hard to do in this emotional environment. But I think China understands they don't want a trade war, And I would hope that the Congress, at least, and the American people and the American business community will urge Trump not to let it become a trade war. So both sides need to keep this in proportion. If it gets out of control, it'll be harmful to the economies of both countries and the global economy as well.
Dan, this is the third round of tariffs announced by the Trump administration. We had the tariffs announced on solar panels and washing machines, then on steel and aluminium. Now we got this latest announcement here. And I'm wondering, what kind of message does this send to the rest of the world? Because, you know, in the last 3 or 4 decades, there's been this movement towards open markets, dropping barriers, getting rid of protectionist barriers, et cetera. And suddenly they seem to be going up again.
Yes. Well, I would characterize each set of tariffs differently. The washer and solar cell measures were conducted under the safeguard agreement, which means governments under the WTO are permitted to recourse to these laws to impose temporary protection to protect industries that have suffered from import surges. So it's not that unusual. You know, about half the time that the U.S. International Trade Commission recommends to the president to impose safeguards, he does so.
But those safeguard tariffs that you talk about, it was last used by the Bush administration imposing tariffs on steel.
That's right.
That was 16 years ago.
That's true.
It was withdrawn a year later.
Yes.
Because it was generally felt that these were not working. Isn't there a lesson in that?
There should be. It doesn't. Tariffs hurt the domestic economy regardless. We pretend that we're retaliating or we're aiming some strategic guns at our foreign competitors, but the measures that are imposed with respect to the IP provisions, this 301, they're going to hurt the U.S. economy tremendously, even if the Chinese don't retaliate, because we're talking about ICT products, information communication technology products, which are crucial to U.S. productivity across the services sector, across the manufacturing sector. We're hurting ourselves. We're hurting the Japanese, the Koreans, the Taiwanese, the Europeans, because China is an export processing country still. So all these products, all this value comes through China, is put together there and shipped to the United States. That exaggerates our bilateral trade deficit with China. It's a meaningless statistic, but by imposing barriers on imports from China, we're imposing barriers on the Japanese, on the Filipinos, on ourselves. But the president he's invoked national security. He's breaking the WTO rules by authorizing tariffs under Section 301, which is not supposed to be accessible to the United States as a member of the WTO. It's not, can't be judge, jury, and executioner. So the Trump administration is saying, we're going to push the limits. We're even going to break the rules. We don't care. We're going to assert our sovereignty over these rules, and we'll see what happens.
Zhang, we're rapidly running out of time, but I want to ask you about something else, and that is the U.S. Treasury Department has imposed restrictions on Chinese investment in U.S. technology companies. How is that going to affect Chinese investors?
I think it's been discussed in Washington in the last couple of months, and I think that has already drawn China's intention, and I think China will have to reduce its investment in America, especially in Silicon Valley, in my opinion. And it's going to be a lose-lose situation for US and China, especially if you see a lot of Silicon Valley companies are waiting and they are needing for more investment from Chinese side. That is going to be a lose-lose situation, in my opinion.
Okay, Robert, I've got 40 seconds. We've entered very rocky territory now in this US-China relationship. How would you characterize the relationship right now?
Well, it's tense. The U.S. and China need to work together on the issue of North Korea, and there has been some progress, considerable progress, in fact, and China's played a very constructive role in that. On the other hand, one of the key objectives of President Xi Jinping is to continue to reform the economy, strengthen the economy, and if we get into these fights over trade and over investment, I think it will undermine some of his domestic goals, and he, under nationalistic pressure, will take retaliatory action. So this is a period of cooperation in one area, but enormous trade tension with the possibility of it becoming considerably worse that will really harm relations in the broad sense of the word.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's all the time we have for, but the conversation continues online. Chat with us about this or any other show on Twitter. We're at CGTN America, or visit us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.